Welcome to Shelf Talkers, a podcast from Village Well Books and Coffee in downtown Culver City. Welcome back to Shelf Talkers. This is Jennifer Casper, founder and owner of Village Well. We are a third place dedicated to welcome, comfort, inspiration, and connection, and Shelf Talkers is our podcast in which we talk to authors and readers about books. I'm here with Judith Martin Straw, my co-host this week. Judith is publisher and editor of Culver City Crossroads and also a bookseller here. This week's guest is Father Greg Boyle, a Jesuit priest, founder of Homeboy Industries, and author of the new book, Cherished Belonging. This is Father Boyle's fourth major book in which he shares stories and spiritual lessons from 40 years of working with Homeboy Industries. Now here's our interview. Father Greg Boyle, it is such an honor to have you here. I have for many years been inspired by the life you live and the work you do. It's inspired the Village Well, a bookstore cafe with a mission that includes connection. To summarize your bio, you're a Jesuit priest and you founded Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles. It's the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry program in the world. Among Homeboy's numerous programs is one very close to our hearts, a bakery that provides job opportunities for people you serve who are moving out of prison and gang life. You've won many awards for your lifetime of brilliant vision and service, including the Presidential Medal of Honor, and you've written 4 books, the latest of which comes out tomorrow, Cherished Belonging. And I want to note that we're conducting this interview on Monday night, November 4th, the eve of a historic presidential election. A lot of people, including myself, need the kind of wisdom and vision that you serve up on a regular basis at this moment in time. So it's really an honor to have you here.
Thank you.
So starting with your new book, Cherished Belonging, we have this idea of a shelf talker. So can you give us a little shelf talker for Cherished Belongings? Tell us about...
Oh, I think it's a different book than I've written in the past, only because I was trying to write it about the times in which we happen to be living. It was supposed to have come out, I think, a month ago, but the damn writer was so slow. So,
I'll bet he's busy.
So I don't know what happened. So all of a sudden now it's on actual...
It's coming out on
tomorrow.
Election Day.
Yeah, which I didn't pick. But it was meant to kind of, how do you come to terms with the us versus everybody mentality. So at Homeboy, we always say there is no us and them, there's just us, So it's funny you were talking about Election Day. Tomorrow. I just came from a funeral of a guy I knew in high school, and his son got up to eulogize him. Very sweet, fun, had good humor, and very tender. And then towards the end, he says, "And now, if you want to honor my father, you know that tomorrow is Election Day. So please vote for the next president of the United States." And everybody in the church kind of went,
tensed,
very tensed up. I mean, it was so palpable. And he goes, "And vote for the next president of the United States." Just kidding.
Yeah.
It was such a head fake. You know? But the tension was like, "Oh no, don't do this. So what are you doing?
It's going to split the room."
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. And then it was perfect, led us right to the place he wanted to lead us to. But anyway, the book was kind of addressing something I've never seen, which is the Great Divide, and so it's complicated, but a lot of other things too. I think I address a lot about hate, and how I think it's the opposite of hate is not love, but health, and that it's how we name things really is consequential.
It is.
So the book is kind of about why is it that we get stuck in the mud and we don't really make as much progress as we would like to. So then I kind of talk about all that and invite people to kind of a larger love.
It's a powerful title because I think that is one of the things that really splits us into us and them, is that craving to belong, is that idea of if I could be a part of. We were just talking about Jesse Katz's book, The Rent Collectors, and that need to belong.
Yeah.
That's where so many people get pulled in with, a group that's not necessarily looking out for their best interest, but happy to have you as a member. We'll be glad to use you. Yeah.
But gangs are belonging gone wrong.
Yeah.
And so the hope at Homeboy Industries is, it's belonging gone right.
Cherished.
Cherished.
Yeah.
And the idea is systems change when people change, and people change when they're cherished. And so, cherishing love is really love with its sleeves rolled up, and it's otherwise love kind of stays in the ether or maybe in your head. Occasionally it wanders to your heart, but unless it makes its way down to your feet,
or at least your hands. Yeah.
Where you're actually moving or working or holding. And
you have the greatest expressions where you take something that we hear in church. We used to laugh when we go to church, and we'd say, we heard the homily. It was like the faith and the love and the Trinity, and it's just like these words you hear all the time. But you have a way of taking those words and twisting them.
Yeah.
So cherished belonging, and then I loved radical kinship from one of your other books. Like kinship. Yeah, we all believe in kinship, but let's make it radical, and let's talk about what that means.
This is like talking out of school. But my editor said, "Oh, I don't like cherished belonging. How about belonging?" So I immediately looked on Amazon, and there were like 90.
There's already a bunch of books. Yeah,
books named belonging. I said, no, cherished is part. Because we say at Homeboy, folks are looking for a place where they're safe, and then they're seen.
Yes.
And then they're cherished.
Yes.
So it's kind of in that order, And so, but cherishing is love in action.
Yeah. And being able to reflect, to people, to like, I see you and I'm seeing you, in this really good, positive way when they have not had a chance to reflect that with themselves, or they haven't been in a place, that reflects on them in a positive way.
Exactly.
That people feel that they're, there's a bias, they're misunderstood, they're categorized,
and they're less than.
Yes.
Yes. And cherishing becomes this big equalizer. It's not about how formally educated you are, or what your experience is or isn't. And it's connective tissue, and then it's also, people inhabit their truth.
Yes.
And they find their true selves in loving, and that's kind of the hope. That's where the transformation happens.
You say near the beginning of the book that you didn't write it to win an argument, but you're trying to do something different with this book. So can you say more about what you mean by that?
Well, I think winning the argument is kind of where we're stuck, It's interesting, during the World Series, and I think it also appeared during the Super Bowl, and it showed up a lot. Mm-hmm. And there's this commercial that black and white photographs, maybe you saw it, and it's people are in each other's face screaming.
Oh, yeah.
And so one of them, somebody's actually takes a punch, and it's rage, and all these black and white photographs. And then the screen goes black, and it says, Jesus loves the people you hate. And I saw it during the World Series, and I thought, no, go back and look at the photographs.
Yeah.
What do you think you're seeing? You're not seeing rage. You're not seeing conflict. You're not seeing disagreement. Which, if you look at it, you go, you're really looking at the fact that we're in the grip of a mental health crisis.
Yes, indeed.
And even the Surgeon General says that's the number one crisis facing us in terms of health is a mental health crisis. And so, but you think it's, whatever. You think it's grievance. You think it's the price of eggs.
Yeah.
No, this is real, people aren't, healthy.
Yeah.
And that's not a moral judgment. That's a health assessment.
Yeah.
So for example, in the book, I talk about, I was at Chicago Midway, and a young woman had a T-shirt on that said, love, not hate. And I remember my immediate reaction was, oh, that's why we don't make progress. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, what does that mean? And it's because if I wore that shirt, it would be about me.
Yeah.
And it still sets up the other. I'm with the
it does,
group.
yeah. There's a differential.
I'm in the group that thinks love is good.
Yeah.
And the other is involved in hate. And then later on in the same airport at Midway, I see an older woman with a big old bulky sweatshirt. And all it said on the front of the shirt was unwell. And I thought, yes, finally, progress.
Someone's talking about the real issue.
Yeah, I mean,
Candid.
yeah, but it was the tale of two two shirts, and I think it was, but once all we're supposed to do is walk each other home to health, and wholeness and wellness.
Yeah.
And so.
And that, that thread that pulls us from emotion into tension, then tension becomes physical stress, then it's inflammation, then you're in pain.
But it's
then
anguish, it's mental anguish.
It's just, yes, it's a heartache that becomes a physical thing.
But it has nothing to do with goodness. That's the thing I treat a lot in the book, because we think it's about good people and bad people.
Well, and that's where it's an argument, right? So you're not winning the argument. It's about taking it out of the frame.
How can I convince you to be a good person, as opposed to, folks are in the grip of something, and how do we compassionately help them, I mean, it's not in a condescending way. It's just all of us are on a continuum of health, and none of us are well until all of us are well.
Very true.
So how do we, help each other? And health and wholeness is never once and for all. It's episodic, and it's 2 steps forward and 5 steps backwards. And then you have those moments where you go, wow, I probably could have been, that was not me at my healthiest right now. But it's not about sin. I talk about that too. And it's not about evil.
Yeah.
And it's just, and when there's illness out there, people don't choose illness. It chooses them, worthy of compassion and unfit to be president, So that's kind of how it works, it seems to me, because you go, no, that's what this is. This isn't about red states and blue states. It's about how do we help us find our true selves in loving.
I just saw a terrific quote from Ursula Le Guin about love. Love is like bread. It has to be remade every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And it doesn't last. And
that's right.
and that's why
even tomorrow. Yeah.
Even guys who are and women who are in recovery, they'll say one day at a time, and I'll always say, "Wow, that's way too long." You really have to kind of connect
one
it to
moment
your breath,
at a time.
One breath at a time.
Yeah,
that is true.
You cherish with every breath you take, because otherwise it's a forever, task.
Yeah.
And you think you're good to go, and you wake up in the morning, maybe you pray and you have your own practice, and then watch how long that lasts. As soon as you arrive, you're being pulled in every direction.
Yeah, there's a phrase in yoga of Sangha. It's the group of people we practice with, but it's who we share breath with.
Yeah.
And then you think, well, we're sharing breath with everyone on the planet. Like we are all breathing the same air.
That's
so
right.
It's a bigger group than you assume. Yeah. So back to belonging. Yeah.
So I know you're not trying to win an argument, but if you were hoping that people would come away from your book with a thought or an action, what would it be?
Well, I was at the LA Times Festival of Books, and I was on a panel with a rabbi and Steve Lopez, and so I can't remember what we were talking about. I don't know what. And at one point I said, at Homeboy we embrace 2 principles. Everyone is unshakably good, no exceptions. And we belong to each other, no exceptions. And then I asked the crowd, it was a packed auditorium, I said, now do I believe if we actually embraced those 2 principles, that every vexing, complex social dilemma that we face, would disappear? Mm-hmm. And then I said, yes, I do. And the entire audience burst into laughter. And I remember I was startled. I kind of went, whoa. And then when the laughter subsided, I said, yes, I do.
I actually
and yes,
do.
I do. And I really think you can draw a straight line from just about anything, from the unhoused to the mental health crisis, to the great division in our country. If you believed those two things, enable you to roll your sleeves up and to cherish people without, to love people without measure and without regret. And but everything else, not to believe that. If you think there's such a thing as bad people, well, then you're going to be drawing lines rather than erase them.
It's a philosophical argument I have with a lot of people, because when you try to put forth the idea that there are no bad people, first of all, breaks. No, there are definitely bad people, and we know who the bad people are. It's like, let's start with there are people, and maybe they do bad things sometimes, or they, everybody wants that category of we know who to blame.
Yeah.
And then, you can flip it around and say, well, the other side of blame is accountability. Somebody thinks you're the bad person. So how do you,
Yeah, but, nobody healthy, has ever invaded Ukraine before.
Right.
and nobody whole has shot up a little schoolroom. And nobody well, slaps Chris Rock at the Oscars.
Right.
You know? So as soon as you frame it in a different way, then you can go, oh, I don't have to, this person belongs to me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, in terms of our own belonging and community in the Sangha.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this person also is unshakably good, but the blindfold has not fallen and they don't see the goodness. I bet we could help each other.
Yeah.
See, as I would say, see as God sees, and that will change everything, you know.
Yeah, we're starting a little bit to be able to drop the stigma around mental health. And again, by just calling it health, you're giving people a lot more permission to step forward and say, I'm unwell, the sweatshirt
rather
there.
than illness, because I don't know, that's part of the stigma, You just say, how could we be healthier?
It's a great word to draw. It's a nice magnet.
I use all those interchangeable, like health and wellness and wholeness. Relational wholeness is kind of the goal. How do we get there?
Yeah,
where we're all connected in kinship and in a community of cherished belonging. So, the language helps because then you don't get stuck. But the minute something's evil or bad or a person's bad, then it just means, well, I guess, we've stopped trying.
Yeah.
The minute we do that, because it ends all conversation. Like there was a shooting in, I think it was Nashville, and they asked a Republican congressman, well, what are you going to do about this shooting? This is your district. And he said, what can you do? How can you legislate against evil? Okay, which is another way of saying conversation is over.
Yeah.
You don't want to take steps because this is about bad people doing bad things.
Exactly. And then the blame is somewhere else, and I don't have any responsibility.
And it's about sin and evil as opposed to, rolling up our sleeves.
Can we get you to talk a little about Homeboy Industries? So I mentioned in the intro that we serve Homeboy pastries here. The city of Culver City also has a relationship with your recycling and e-waste programs. So there's all kinds of ways that people in the city can interact with Homeboy and touch some of that good work you're doing to heal people. So can you talk a little bit about the programs and what they do?
So we've been around for 36 years and born in the housing projects in Boyle Heights, and 8 gangs in my parish, and the place of the highest concentration of gang activity according to the LAPD back then in the mid 80s, 88 in particular. And then we just started things. We started a school, we started a jobs program. Then we couldn't find enough employers willing to hire our folks, so we started a bakery and then a tortilla kind of factory. And now we have 13 social enterprises, 10,000 folks a year walk through our doors trying to imagine a life. And so, like Homeboy Electronic Recycling, as you mentioned, and then the bakery, which was our first enterprise. So that's been around for 30 years.
The bakery was over in Boyle Heights, right?
Yeah, it was in Boyle Heights. And then, so we started in 88, and the bakery burned down in October of 99. Yeah, and so that was a real turning point. So that's our first 10 years were bomb threats, hate mail, death threats, because, the city demonized gang members just like
so extremely,
law
yeah.
enforcement. And so the friend of our friend is our enemy.
Yeah.
And if you demonize gang members, it was a short hop to demonize me for helping them.
Sure.
But that was those first 10 years. And then the bakery burned down. And the LA Times, I remember the next day or so, wrote a kind of a editorial that said, this Homeboy doesn't belong to Father Greg Boyle, it belongs to the city. And then people, elected officials, I remember Barbara Boxer, and all sorts of people sent us money, and we bought the property.
In Little Tokyo?
In Chinatown. Where we built finally our current headquarters in 2007. So it took us a while from 99 to 2007 to have it all done. But so it was, and that's, you don't see the tipping points like that. It's just like overnight, people said, oh, let's not be tough on crime. Because if we're tough on crime, that just means we're not serious about actually reducing it.
Yeah, and that rhetoric has come back again in another cycle.
We'll see how things go tomorrow on Election Day. But that's unfortunate because, we've sort of established that smart is really better than tough.
Yes, yeah, and crime is down all over the place.
Exactly, but that doesn't seem to matter.
Well, it's not selling handguns the way they want.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I'm not all that hopeful about this moment in terms of that, But in the old days, we thought the choice was tough on crime or soft. Mm-hmm. And nobody would pick soft if those are the choices.
Right.
But if the choice is tough or smart, I think Homeboy at that point in our city, we went, yeah, I want smart.
Yes.
And then it changed everything. And then we had results, because the decade of death was 88 to 98. But 92 had the highest number of gang-related homicides, 1,000. And then what's happened to that number since then? Well, it's been cut in half and cut in half again.
Yeah.
And so, that's the reality.
Yes.
But, tell that to the mother of somebody who's lost a kid.
Sure.
But it's still out there, but it's not what it was in 92. And I think even law enforcement would acknowledge that.
They have, reports that I've seen. Yeah.
So.
And so tell us some stories. What happens at a granular level to someone who comes to Homeboy? What's it like, and how does the organization or how does it help them?
Well, I was telling this story. Everything's whatever is fresh on my mind.
Yeah, let's hear a story.
But I'm remembering this kid who was like 16 years old and came and wanted into the program many years ago. I said, well, you're going to have to work with, and I mentioned the name of a gang that I knew he hated. Mm-hmm. And he said, I hate those guys. I hate them with all my heart and soul. And I said, well, do me a favor, name someone from that gang. And he couldn't name a single person. I thought, so what is that indicating? It's not indicating hate. Mm-hmm. It's just a measure of, again, that he's broken, he's damaged. Mm-hmm. If you don't transform your pain, you're going to just keep inflicting it. So then he came and he surrendered to the culture in a community that's healing. And then, if it's true that somebody comes, if the traumatized are likely to cause trauma, then it has to be true that the cherished will be able to find their way to the joy there is and cherishing themselves and others. So, but that's kind of a thing that happens every day. You know,
You see those stories every day.
every day. Yeah.
Do you have a good example of one of those?
Somebody who's found
Yeah.
some healing and has passed it on or been able to offer healing to somebody else.
A kid named Danny who I met him when he was like 13 years old, and so he had made a solemn vow, I will never step foot in Homeboy Industries. So I just knew him on the streets. I knew him, riding my bike in the projects, and every time I'd see him and he would be kicking it with his homies, he always made sure that he lifted up his shirt, and I could see a gun tucked into the front of his pants, but that was he was a real posturing guy. And then, so I only knew him from the streets. And then I got to know him, locked up at juvenile hall and then probation camp. And then he finally went to prison at 18 and did a 2-year stint. And so in recovery, gang recovery is no different. They say it takes what it takes.
Right. Right.
And then, but for gang recovery, it's, the death of a friend, the birth of a son, a long stretch in prison. But for Danny, he got out, and his mother had pancreatic cancer, so she only had 6 months to live. And a lot of siblings, but he was the designated hospice caregiver. And I watched him, he was so tender with his mom, all the more remarkable because she had been, let's just say, less than tender with him growing up. So I went and saw him there with her, and I anointed her, and, a week later she died. A week later he walks into Homeboy for the first time, So then I watch him, he gets his GED, he works alongside guys I know that he used to shoot at. Yeah, so it was very, palpable. You can see the actual growth right before your eyes. Well, one day he came into my office, and very dramatic beginning. He said, what happened to me yesterday has never happened to me before. And then he tells me that at 5, at the end of work, he went to the red line across the orange line, or whatever color it was, Chinatown stop. And he was taking the train home. And he said the train was packed, but he was able to get a seat. And he said there was a guy hanging onto the pole right in front of him, and he could see tattoos on his hands. So he was a gang member, older guy. He didn't know him. And he said he was medio pedo, which means he was a little bit drunk. And Danny's wearing a huge sweatshirt that says, Homeboy Industries, jobs, not jails. And so the guy looks at Danny and he goes, you worked there? And Danny, doesn't really know, should I engage this guy? And he nods. And the guy says, is it any good? And Danny says, well, it's helped me. In fact, I don't think I'm going to go back to prison because of this place. And then he stands up and he reaches into his pocket. He pulls out a little piece of paper, blank paper, and a pen. And he starts to very carefully write the address of Homeboy Industries. And as he's telling me the story, he says, I couldn't believe I knew the address by heart. So then he hands it to the guy, face to face, looking at each other. And he says, you come and see us, and we'll help you. And the guy says, thank you. And the train stops, and the guy gets off, and Danny sits back down. Now he returns to his earlier refrain. He says, what happened to me next has never happened to me in my life. And he can barely speak, and he says, everyone on the train was staring at me. Everyone on the train was nodding at me. Everyone on the train was smiling at me. And now can't speak. And he said, for the first time in my life, I felt admired. And I remember the two of us, we cried.
That's powerful stuff.
We just looked at each other and because I don't know what else do you do. But so that's the sound of somebody discovering his true self and loving, where it's kind of other-centered, and then it becomes loving-centered. And then you discover that loving is your home, and once you know that, you'll never be homesick again. And again, it starts and stops, and it's on a continuum, and gosh, I wish I had been healthier in my response to that person. But the truth of the matter is, good people aren't loving. Healthy people are. So healthy people are loving, and loving people are healthy. And if you're looking for holy people, then look for loving, healthy people. Those are the holy ones. It's nothing extraordinary to it. But it's about health.
We have a lot of writing programs that happen in this space, and a lot of the writing instructors talk about how writing is a really healing process for a lot of people. And you, in this book, you talk about how writing is an arduous process for you, and that it doesn't sound like it comes easily. But does writing these books help you in your personal healing and growth?
Well, yeah, I suppose it does. I mean, it's, because you take time off. I didn't take enough time off to write this book. I said, well, I'm going to take a month, and then you're writing while having a life and speaking and dealing with.
Yeah. What about earlier when you wrote other books, or maybe starting out as a pastor writing homilies? Did the process of writing, was that part of a meditative process for you?
I don't write. I mean, I really don't write.
You don't?
Yeah, so like homilies, you mentioned homilies.
Yeah.
That's why tattoos on the heart happened, because I was preaching in 25 different detention facilities on a rotating basis. And
wow.
So every Sunday I'd come up with I had one homily for a month.
You just had a different audience for it.
A different audience every time. And I kept track. I'd say, well, this is my November, 1990. So I knew that. So I didn't repeat myself. And then I'd force the gospel readings into these three stories. And it always worked. You just got a different angle, but you told the same stories. So I told the stories and collected the stories, and I never wrote them down because I was telling them. And then somebody said, why don't you write them down? So then I did. And I don't know who I met. I met somebody. I said, how can I get an agent? And she was a high-powered agent for CAA or one of those. And so she said, yeah, I know somebody in New York. And then she just got this guy to read it. And right away I had, he had all these offers. So it was really kind of incredible. And that was fast and furious. But the book was done, basically. I didn't have to, I did a little bit of work with an editor, but,
That's your first book, Tattoos on the Heart.
That was my first book, yeah. I think thanks to this place, because independent bookstores, I don't know how it all works. But next thing you know, you're a New York Times best-selling book. How did it happen? I have no idea. It didn't happen with the other books, but it happened with that one. And it was kind of early on.
I think you were new. People were discovering your voice.
But it was also L.A., I was kind of known okay in L.A., so maybe that's when they bought the book, but it's not Amazon.
There's a difference between knowing people and sitting down and listening to their stories. And the time it takes you to read a book, you really get immersed in the voice and the message.
Yeah. And then audio books and stuff. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
That's great.
I'll never write another book. I'm saying this.
That's what you said last time.
I did say
that is what you said
time.
last time.
People remind me.
You might be surprised how many people say those things and they don't really happen that way.
I'm sure. I've worked in a lot of different nonprofits, and I always admired what your books were able to do for Homeboy, and how you had this calling card, and you could go out and take your book to another parish and tell the stories from it, and let those people hear your voice, be inspired by the very different kind of ministry that you've had from the parish priests that we meet on the west side of Los Angeles or anywhere else in the world, and be inspired by it, and then buy the book and support Homeboy Industries, and it's a great marketing strategy.
Yeah.
Not to
know
mention
that
a good way
wasn't-
to spread the word. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So we always end our podcast with the final question of asking our interviewee to recommend books. So do you have 2 or 3 books you would recommend that people read that would help them, that, relate somehow to your work?
Well, I always think in terms of authors, because sometimes I can't remember titles, but my floor is just covered with books. So I read a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But I just finished Mirabai Starr's book, Ordinary Mysticism, I highly recommend that. And then I just read Anne Lamott's, blanking out on
Her
her
most recent one?
Somehow.
Yeah, Somehow.
Yeah.
And
She's such a great voice. I always enjoy her stuff.
No,
yeah.
I read everything and get it on pre-order, But then Richard Rohr, he's somebody I constantly read and reread. But I kind of do, I do theology is kind of and mysticism. And James Finley, he had a memoir that's very sweet and powerful. And he has a podcast on Turning to the Mystics that I recommend.
Nice.
He's wonderful.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to know him,
You do know him?
Yeah, so that's been
He's
kind
local.
of a pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, what a pleasure it's been to have you here on the Shelf Talkers podcast and here at Village Well. And just thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. This is like home, the Village Well.
We are
you.
delighted to be part of your cherished belonging.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
If you'd like more information from us, check out the show notes or send us an email at podcast@villagewell.com. You can always order the books mentioned in each episode through villagewell.com. This episode of Shelf Talkers is brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee. It was produced and edited by Josh Stretton Carlson, and our theme music is from Noah Vickland. See you in 2 weeks, and keep reading.